Hello, dear listeners. I'm your host, Genevieve Hopkins, and welcome to episode 31 of the Wheel and Cross podcast. While many in the Northern Hemisphere will celebrate Imbolc or Brigid's Day, the first signs of spring, on Saturday, here in the Southern Hemisphere we will be marking the ancient Celtic celebration of Lughnasadh, the first harvest, the harvest of the grains. At this time of year, as the hot sun dries the nodding heads of grain to gold, farmers feverishly work to finish bringing in their crops before the season turns. Although harvesting grain crops such as wheat, oats, rye and barley is now a highly mechanised and industrial process, there is still great value in remembering and celebrating old agricultural traditions that connect us to our European heritage, our food, the seasons, and this beautiful land that we call home. There's also deep wisdom to be gained from our first peoples and their connection to native grains, which still survive in pockets across the country. In today's episode, we will explore the celebration of Lughnasadh and Lammas, the tradition of corn dollies, seasonal folk songs, a brief history of grain and grain farming, and the agricultural potential of Australia's native grasses. This podcast is free, but if you like my work, please consider subscribing to the Wheel and Cross Substack page, www.wheelandcross.substack.com. I would also appreciate your reviews on any of the podcasting platforms you use. Feel free to share this podcast and leave comments on the podcast page. Welcome to episode 31 of the Wheel and Cross podcast, Lughnasadh, first harvest, harvest of the grains. As always, I would like to acknowledge the custodians of these lands on which I work and live in Australia's capital region, the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my deep respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and to all First Nations and First People across Australia. Lughnasadh is an ancient agricultural celebration honouring Lugh, the Celtic god of the harvest, and his foster mother Telchu, who is said to have cleared the land for farming in Ireland. It was a time to celebrate the artisanal skills, to hold fairs and games, and to make offerings to Lugh and his foster mother. Athletic games and competitions such as wrestling, horse racing, archery or chess honoured Lugh's talents and abilities, as well as being an opportunity for some communal fun. Climbing sacred hills or mountains, such as Craigpatrick in Ireland, was customary for the devout, and hand fasting and weddings at this time of year were considered auspicious. Lugh was not only the god of the harvest, but also of light, fire, sun, crafts, skills, poetry, music, magic, and war. He was known as Lughnasadh, or long-armed, for his skill with throwing weapons, and Lughnasadh, or skilled in many arts, for his mastery of various disciplines. He was born from the union of Cian, a member of the Tuatha De Danann, and Ethnu, or Elthu, the daughter of Balor, who was the leader of the Fomorians, a race of monstrous beings who opposed the Tuatha De Danann. Lugh's birth fulfilled a prophecy that Balor would be killed by his own grandson. Lugh grew up to be a handsome and charismatic hero who learned many skills from his foster fathers, Manannán mac Lir, the sea god, Gubniu, the smith god, and Iachyd, the lightning god. He became the leader of the Tuatha De Danann and led them to victory against the Fomorians in the Battle of Mag Tuired, or Moitura, where he killed Balor with his magic spear or sling. He also avenged his father's death by killing Balor's son, Bres. Lu's son was Cuchulainn, or Hound of Culann, one of the greatest heroes of Irish mythology. Tailtiu was the foster mother of Lu, the goddess of agriculture and one of the most powerful deities of the Tuatha De Danann. She was the last queen of the Imbolc, a race of people who ruled Ireland before the arrival of the Tuatha De Danann. She married Iachyd mac Éiric, the king of the Imbolc, and later became the foster mother of Lu, who was given to her by his grandfather, Bala of the Evil Eye. Tailtiu was devoted to her foster son and the welfare of her people. She undertook a massive project to clear the land for farming, which took a toll on her health and strength. She died of exhaustion after completing her task, but not before asking Lu to hold a festival in her honour every year. Lu fulfilled her wish and established the festival of Lughnasadh, also known as the Tailtean Games, which took place on August the 1st. The festival celebrated grains, the first fruit of the harvest, and featured athletic, artistic, and craft competitions. It was also a time for marriages, fairs, and trade. Tailtiu's name lives on in the place where she cleared the land and where the festival was held, Tailta, or Tailtown, in County Meath, Ireland. As Christianity spread throughout Celtic lands, Lughnasadh was Christianized and renamed Lammas, from the Old English Laffmas, meaning loaf mass. On this day, people would bring bread made from freshly harvested wheat to the church to be blessed by the priest. The bread was then used in various rituals to protect the harvest and ensure abundance. One of the most common offerings or customs for Lughnasadh was the creation of a corn dolly, also known as a corn maiden, corn mother, or old woman. Corn is the Old English name for grain crops, including wheat, rye, oats, and barley. It comes from the Proto-Germanic word cornum, meaning small seed, which is also the source of Old Frisian and Old Saxon, German and Old Norse corn, and Middle Dutch korn, meaning grain, and is the root word for kernel. A corn dolly was a decorative object made from weaving grain stalks together, usually in the shape of a human or an animal, though it could also take the form of spirals, braids, crosses, or other symbolic shapes. It was believed that the spirit of the grain lived in the last sheaf of the harvest, and that by making a corn dolly out of it, the spirit would have a home for winter. The corn dolly was then kept in a special place until the next spring, when it was ploughed into the first furrow or burned to release the spirit. Corn dollies were also used as good luck charms and symbols of fertility and abundance. Different regions had different styles and names for their corn dollies, and displayed them in different parts of the house, depending on their local or even familial custom. Corn dollies created from the grain harvest were and still are customary throughout northern, western, and even eastern Europe. James George Fraser, Scottish social anthropologist and folklorist, described German harvest dolly traditions in his book, The Golden Bough, published in 1890. In the neighbourhood of Danzig, Germany, the person who cuts the last ears of corn makes them into a doll, which is called the corn mother or the old woman, and is brought home on the last wagon. In some parts of Holstein, the last sheaf is dressed in women's clothes and called the Corn Mother. It is carried home on the last wagon and then thoroughly drenched with water. The drenching with water is doubtless a rain charm. In the district of Puck in Styria, the last sheaf, called the Corn Mother, is made up into the shape of a woman by the oldest married woman in the village, of an age from 50 to 55 years. The finest ears are plucked out of it and made into a wreath, which, twined with flowers, is carried on her head by the prettiest girl of the village to the farmer or squire, while the Corn Mother is laid down in the barn to keep off the mice. In other villages of the same district, the Corn Mother, at the close of harvest, is carried by two lads at the top of a pole. They march behind the girl who wears the wreath to the squire's house, while he receives the wreath and hangs it up in the hall. The Corn Mother is placed on the top of a pile of wood, where she is the centre of the harvest supper and dance. The article accompanying this episode provides several videos and images demonstrating how to make corn dollies from different regions of the British Isles. There are many folk songs from around Europe that are related to or specifically about the grain harvest season, including two well-known Irish songs, John Barleycorn and The Wind That Shakes the Barley. John Barleycorn is a folk song that tells the story of a personified barley crop that is harvested, malted, brewed, and distilled to make alcoholic drinks. The song has many versions and variations, but the main theme is the cycle of life and death and the symbolic sacrifice of the grain for human consumption. The song is also a metaphor for the hardships and struggles of the common people, who are often exploited and oppressed by the powerful and wealthy. Some of the earliest recorded versions of John Barleycorn date back to the 16th century, but the song may have older origins in pagan rituals or myths. The song has been sung by many folk singers and bands such as Robert Burns, Traffic, Steel Eye Span and the Pogues. The song has also inspired other works of art and literature, such as Jack London's novel of the same name, which is a memoir of his experiences with alcoholism. The accompanying article includes a music video of John Barleycorn, performed by modern folk band The Imagined Village, with special guest Billy Bragg. The song, The Wind That Shakes the Barley, was written by Robert Dwyer Joyce, a Limerick-born poet and professor of English literature. He published it in 1861 in a collection of his poetry entitled Ballads, Romances and Songs. It was inspired by the Irish Rebellion of 1798, also known as Éirí Amach in Irish and the Huries in Ulster Scots. This was a failed uprising against British rule in Ireland, led by the United Irishmen, a revolutionary group that sought to create an independent Irish republic. The song tells the story of a young rebel who is about to join the fight against the British forces. He is torn between his old love and his new love, his sweetheart and his country. He decides to leave her and seek the mountain glen where the rebels are gathering. But as he kisses her goodbye, a bullet from the enemy kills her in his arms. He buries her in the wildwood and vows to avenge her death. He later dies in battle and joins her in the grave. The title of the song refers to the barley that the rebels carried in their pockets as provisions for their march. Barley also grew over the unmarked mass graves where the rebels were buried. The Wind That Shakes the Barley is a powerful expression of Irish nationalism and sorrow, and has been sung and recorded by various well-known artists such as the Chieftains, Sinead O'Connor, Solus, and The Dead Can Dance. It also inspired the title of a 2006 film by Ken Loach, which depicts the Irish War of Independence and the Irish Civil War. The accompanying article includes a beautiful rendition of The Wind That Shakes the Barley, performed by Mary ní Chuileáin. There's also a fabulous music video of a song called Sonnenregen by German modern folk group Faun that is drenched in the seasonal symbology of the harvest and Lughnasadh, with subtitles translating the German lyrics into English. Let's now take a look at the history of grain farming and the development of agriculture. Grain is the starchy seed of selectively bred and domesticated grasses that have become staple foods in many cultures around the world. They include wheat, oats, rye, and barley, commonly grown and eaten in Europe, rice in Asia, and corn in the Americas. The domestication of grains began around 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent region of the Middle East and spread throughout the world as humans and their innovations migrated to different regions. Today, grains are grown on a massive scale around the world, with wheat, rice, and corn being the most widely cultivated crops. The Industrial Revolution had an enormous impact on crop farming. Monocropping, mechanisation, fertilisers, pesticides, and genetic engineering have led to improved crop yields and increased efficiencies to some extent. However, this type of grain production has resulted in disastrous consequences for the environment, decreasing soil fertility, polluting water, and destroying ecosystems. In Australia, our already fragile soils have been decimated by intensive cropping that strips the soil of organic carbon and destroys soil ecosystems. Decreases in grain productivity and arable land due to soil loss, ecosystem destruction, and climate change, as well as increases in grain production costs and artificial inputs, have led to growing interest in using Australian native grasses in cropping systems. Australian native grasses are a diverse group of plants that have evolved over millions of years in Australia's harsh and varying climate. Flour from native grains such as millet, kangaroo grass, and Mitchell grass were important to many First Nations cultures and survival for thousands of years before colonisation. Their deep root systems and perennial growth have many benefits for the environment, such as preventing soil erosion, increasing groundwater recharge, and supporting native biodiversity. Native millet, Panatum decompositum in particular, was found to be easy to grow and harvest, easy to grind into flour, significantly more nutritious than wheat, and gluten-free. Kangaroo grass, Vemida triandra, can also be used for flour in the same way as wheat, has 40% more protein than wheat, and is apparently quite tasty. It also stores more moisture than European crops and creates its own microclimate in which native insects thrive. Regardless of the environmental issues, grain agriculture has become vital for our survival, and its rich folklore and folkways are important to remember and preserve. Grain farmers across southern Australia have or will soon be wrapping up their winter grain harvests for the year. And so, I wish you all a bountiful Lughnasadh. Next week, we dive into the dog days of summer, the history of the saying, and of our Australian dogs, the dingo, cattle dog, and kelpie. In the meantime, I offer you an Irish farm blessing. May the rains sweep gentle across your fields. May the sun warm the land. May every good seed you have planted bear fruit, and late summer find you standing in fields of plenty. See you next week for episode 32, The Dog Days of Summer. you.